Hey, it's Alex here, and just before the video starts, I want to thank Bob Pockrass again for the opportunity to make this episode of Trackside Chats possible. I really appreciate it, all the time that he gave us. It means a lot, especially as someone who wants to be a motorsports journalist when they grow up. I really appreciate it. Also, to put some context for YouTube watchers or video watchers, I filmed the first part of this episode with Bob Pockrass on September 22nd and the second part on November 7th, both in 2025. So you're going to see different clothes on me and him throughout the video. That is why. Anyway, thank you for listening to Trackside Chats and have an amazing day. All right, so I'm here with Bob Pockrass, NASCAR and IndyCar reporter for Fox Sports. Thank you for joining me.
Great to be here, Alex. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, one thing I wanted to know is you've been doing journalism since 1991. So, how did you get your start in journalism? When did you know that you wanted to be a journalist?
Well, well, I started working for the school paper at Indiana University in my freshman year, say about 1988, I think. This was my spring semester, and I wrote a story about what was then called a crop walk for hunger. I don't know if they have those anymore, but I wrote a story about that was happening on campus at Indiana, and I saw two people with a copy of the newspaper walk up to the desk at the event because I was also covering the event. I had written a preview, and they're like, "We'd like to walk and donate." And I thought, the power of the press, right? You wrote something, and it sparked somebody to take action. So it sparked somebody to do something with their free morning. And ever since then, I was like, you know, that there aren't a lot of professions, I don't think, that you can have that type of influence. People's discretionary time and discretionary income are pretty valuable. They don't have a lot of it, and if you can help them make decisions on what to do with that time and what to do with that money, that's a great thing to be able to do.
Yeah. Um, and you were at Daytona Beach News and Journal from 1991 to 2003. Then you joined NASCAR Scene magazine. What made you want to, go from, because you covered high school and college sports on the Daytona Journal, correct?
Yeah, I covered everything. I covered high school, I covered colleges, I covered racing when it was in Daytona, I covered the short tracks. I covered a little bit of everything. Covered some Magic, Orlando Magic, covered some Florida State football, and you ask, why join a weekly NASCAR magazine, and mainly it was a way to cover a national sport, get a pretty big boost in salary, and know that you're going to be able to travel, and and who knew what was going to where it was going to go from there. I didn't go to NASCAR scene thinking I was going to cover motorsports for the next 20 years, but I think I knew it could be a possibility when you go from covering all sorts of sports to one sport. But it was the NASCAR scene magazine had a lot of great journalists, had a lot of great editors. I knew it was a place that I was going to be able to learn a lot and grow as a journalist and as a reporter. And so that's why I made that move. And NASCAR C magazine back then, when you talk about the early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of internet then, as far as being able to read news online. So a lot of people on the West Coast, this was the way they got their NASCAR news, or if you didn't live in a NASCAR market. So it was really a great way to help deliver info to people who wanted to kind of digest the product.
And I assume you were a motorsports fan before, fully delving into motorsports journalism. Did you have any favorite drivers or anything like that? Because I know that everyone kind of has their own favorite drivers. So, were there any drivers you liked coming into
Yes. So,
journalism?
I mean, I grew up in Indiana. I moved to Indianapolis when I was 10. So, like, I more knew IndyCar growing up than NASCAR. Didn't know anything really about NASCAR until I moved for the job following college in 91 to Daytona. So,
Mhm.
so I followed some IndyCar and F1 and stuff back then. But I can't really say I had a favorite like NASCAR driver. I never went to a race as a fan. I always went to it as a journalist. But I could follow the careers of Mark Donohue and some of the other big open wheel drivers when I was growing up. But if you when you talk about starting to cover NASCAR in the 90s, I think everybody talks about you would talk about Jeff Gordon, right? Because that's kind of when he really started. And I wouldn't say he was my favorite, but he was always a great person to interview because even if he was answering the question for the hundredth time, he made it sound like he was answering it for the first time.
Yeah. Um, what like based on Jeff being a great interviewer, were there any other drivers or team owners or anyone that you've interviewed in the motorsports community that's also really easy or some favorites that you have?
I mean, I think depending on Brad Keselowski can be very insightful. Kyle Busch can be insightful if he's in the right mood. There are times obviously when he's not, but when he's kind of relaxed and he can be very, engaging as far as giving detailed answers. And, I think it depends when you talk about maybe the business of the sport. You go to somebody like Brad Keselowski, who's owned race teams, or a Kyle Busch who's owned race teams. When you talk about like the technical part of a car, you'll probably go to like a Kyle Busch or a Kurt Busch, right? Because they're able to explain things, down, you won't go Kyle Larson to ask about a something very technical about the car because he doesn't, know it. He goes in there and goes fast and gives great feedback. So it just sometimes depends on what you're looking for the topic that you're writing about.
You were a staff writer for ESPN and sporting news media, and a freelance writer for USA Today. What would you say were the biggest differences for you between being a staff writer for ESPN and sports news media and being a freelance writer for USA Today?
Well, I did USA Today for 1 year after, when I joined Fox Sports to help with their TV coverage, but they didn't have a website at the time. So I think the biggest difference there was, I was reporting for Fox on the weekends and then yet writing for USA Today. So the most difficult thing was just managing, okay, what's what am I doing for one publication and what am I doing, to help on with the TV broadcasts and shows at Fox. So it's just mainly kind of managing, two different, two different silos, if you will. And then, so I think that was probably the biggest. But I think when you talk about the difference, the biggest difference is just how social media continues to evolve and how you have to evolve with it.
Yeah. And speaking of social media, actually, you are very big on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. What's your routine during like when you're breaking major news or you need racing updates during a race weekend? How do you stay so fast and accurate with your updates?
Well, I try to reread them before I post them, make sure that there's no mistakes. And, I just have I take a lot of notes. I kind of know what I want to look for on a race weekend. I have two scanners going, a scanner on NASCAR and then a scanner that I can go listen to any of the other teams. We have some other tools on the TV side that help. And I just I think a lot of it's just relationships with people and talking to people and trying to figure out what is going on. I think the most difficult thing can be that a lot of times we probably hear things maybe 2 or 3 weeks after maybe the talks had started or decisions were made. And sometimes that stuff even changes in those 2 or 3 weeks, right? So somebody may tell you something they think is true, but it's actually changed in the last couple of weeks, and they just hadn't heard it.
Gotcha, gotcha. What you just started IndyCar, or a majority of IndyCar journalism for Fox because they gained the rights to it this year. Um, but you're also doing NASCAR. So what's it been like balancing both IndyCar and NASCAR?
Well, it's a lot on the race weekends when they're both running, and you can't be at two places at once. So a lot of checking emails, a lot of uh, having DVRs set up so that watch on your laptop, a lot of apps so that you can watch things, a lot of downloads, and it's just a matter of knowing what the issues are going into a weekend, so that you're not wasting a lot of time, uh, and knowing the schedules for each series and having it all kind of planned out, being like, okay, I got to pay attention to this here, but then this will be going on here. Okay, I know I'm gonna miss this, so I'll have to catch up at this time. So it's been, it's certainly a challenge. As I said, you can't be at two places at once, and so, if wherever race I'm at, that'll typically will be my focus. And I do work, helping out, especially on the when it's a Fox telecast. If I'm at a NASCAR race and it's a Fox telecast, or a IndyCar race and it's a Fox telecast, a lot of times sending info to the booth and to producers of those telecasts. So it's just a matter of being organized, and also kind of knowing that, hey, you're not going to be able to get to everything. You just get to as much as you can.
Yeah. Was this so? You covered this past year's Indy 500. Was that the first Indy 500 you ever covered?
Oh no, the first Indy 500 I covered was probably '89. I covered, I was a student at Indiana University, and we quote the United Press International would hire quote runners. So you'd mainly, like, there'd be one main writer, and he'd hired a couple. It's actually me and Dustin Long from NBC, who was a student at Indiana at the time. They would hire us to go and get quotes from drivers and bring it back to the writer, so that writer could just concentrate. Maybe he's concentrating on what's going on the racetrack, and something happens, and we would be the ones who would go get those quotes. And then '91, I covered the month of May for the Marion, Indiana paper and the Gannett News Service. And then I went to a couple others when Lynn St. James was from Daytona Beach. She was living in Daytona Beach, and when she ran, we were there. And then I was there in 2018 for Danica Patrick's last race. I was working for ESPN at the time. So I had been to several. I'd been, I think I want to say my first one was 1980 or 81 as a kid watching in the stands. And then I covered some when I was in college, and then a couple of times in the mid '90s, and then in 2018. But first one, obviously working with Fox and the TV telecast.
What was that like working with Fox for not your first Indy 500, but one of the most memorable, I would say, in the recent years at least?
Yeah, I mean, look, we had hundreds of people there, a lot of, and you're just, you spend really the whole first part of the season, especially on our side, just relearning people, or learning what's new in the sport for me, and just to be prepared for the Indy 500 and the Indy 500 weeks. And obviously, with the craziness of the Penske issues during that week, it was a little chaotic. It was a little tense, but it's just great to be part of something that millions and millions of people are watching, and being able to contribute to that type of production.
Let's talk about some of your awards and accolades. So in let's see, 2009 and 2013, you were honored as Writer of the Year by the National Motorsports Press Association. What what was that like? Like working your way up from Daytona, to ESPN and all that, and
Yeah.
getting those awards.
Yeah, those awards are nice. I mean, to me, the greatest award is sitting in a restaurant and hearing somebody talk about a story you wrote in the booth next to you. Like knowing that somebody actually read something you wrote, and knowing that it had such an impact on them that they were discussing it with somebody else. The awards are nice. They are, those awards typically were based on like how many. It'd be like if you got first place in a category, you got 5 points, second place 3, and third place 1. And it showed that you had a diverse, like in news and feature writing and column writing, because usually you had to score points in all those. And they were judged by either journalism grad students or professors. So you felt like that they had a good idea of, or at least a decent idea of, of what made a good story and everything. So it was, it's always nice to be recognized, and nice to be recognized, when you're kind of competing against your peers. So that is it was good. I just think just like a lot of people, when it comes to awards, you have kind of, a player has their stats and their wins and losses, and then the awards are kind of, they come if everything falls into place. I think it's kind of the same thing. Like it's much more rewarding to me to have 100 people come to a tweet up at a race who've been following me, who I know I've had an impact on, versus versus an award that's that might be the opinion of one or two judges. I mean, we're really judged by our people and by our readers more than by a contest judge.
What has been your favorite news that you've broken during your time as a reporter?
I think, this will go way back, but you remember when Ernie Irvin's hood flew off during the Daytona 500? Gosh, you have to look it up. It was in the 1990s. But I was hanging outside the care center because they brought the fan to the care center who had gotten hit by the hood. And somebody come out of the care center, and I was standing outside, and I got his attention. And I said, "Hey, is that your friend in there?" He said, "Yeah." He's like, "He's gonna be okay." And I said, "They're probably just gonna whisk him away." I go, "But can I give you my phone number, and can you call me?" And he's like, "Hey, we're staying at this hotel." He's like, "Just call us. We're in this room. Just call us in like 90 minutes." This before cell phones, right? This is pretty much. I mean, I maybe had a car phone at the time, but. And so I was like, all right, yeah, we'll do that. And I actually wasn't even able to, I was so busy, we gave it to another reporter. But that reporter called that person, and, I think they broke their arm. The hood had broken his arm. And, we had the story from the guy whose arm was broken by Ernie Irvin's hood that had flown into the stands. And, and back then in the 90s, like, there was no X, you couldn't see the person, like, and that was really. And again, I wasn't even the one who talked to the person, but it was just great to be able to kind of talk to that fan, have that fan's perspective in the newspaper, either the next day or the day after, that that nobody else was, that nobody else had, and because it was just pretty much, hey, hanging out and getting a story, and again, wasn't even one I wrote, but just the satisfaction for us to be able to get that at the Daytona paper was great.
I have a question for you then, a follow-up question about that. Did the fan get to keep the hood?
I don't think so. I don't think so. That's way back, and that's probably 30 years ago. I mean, you'd have to check when that was.
Yeah, because when I was in North Carolina, there was a Cheerios, I think it was a Chris Buescher hood. I'm not fully sure. I know the driver's currently racing, but I don't remember which driver it was, and it was a Cheerios hood that was just being sold there. And I was like, if I could bring that back to where I live, I would buy that in an instant, but it cost way too much to ship.
Yeah.
My final question is, do you have any advice for aspiring young journalists today?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I would say, like, no matter what sport you want to cover lots of sports, do things that put you in uncomfortable situations, cover sports that you don't know a lot about, that you have to learn about, and then start asking questions about, that put you in uncomfortable situations. Because even if you know about sport, you're always going to be put in kind of uncomfortable situations at times. And employers want to see people who have well-rounded experiences, and that goes for anything. Like, it goes from if you want to work for a race team in marketing or PR or cover the sport as a journalist. Who's ever doing the hiring, they're usually going to want you to have experiences, not just in not only in the sport that you're covering, but in other sports, so that you're well rounded. And, like, I wouldn't be afraid. I mean, you might, depending on what type of job you aspire to. I mean, if let's say you want to cover college sports, and you find a job that's 20%, that's covering the college, that's all the college sports, education, everything, but it's 20 or 30% sports. You shouldn't say, well, I don't want to do it because it's not all sports. You're gonna cover the sports, and people are gonna notice, but you're also going to learn so much doing the other stuff that will be invaluable as things go on.
Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. And that's about it. Thank you for coming on. We appreciate it, and have an amazing day.
Yeah, you too, Alex. Thanks for having me.